Let's take a gander at this famous herb called coriander. These plants are going to seed, which changes the look from the flat-leafed coriander that most of us are used to seeing in the shops and the store to this small-leafed plant, nice and tall with hundreds of white flowers. Doesn't it look beautiful? G'day, I'm Mark from Self-Sufficient Me, and in this video I'm going to give you my 5 top tips on how to grow a ton of coriander in one small raised garden bed just like this. So let's get into it. I've also heard this plant called cilantro, and some call it both cilantro and coriander, meaning the herb side of it is called cilantro, so the leaves, and the seed side of it, when it goes to seed, is called coriander. But that's all too complicated for me, so I just call it coriander, no matter what it is. Coriander the herb, coriander the spice. It's also commonly called Chinese parsley, and I know why, because these leaves do look a little bit like a flat-leafed parsley. Call it what you want. But unlike parsley, coriander has a distinctly pungent taste that can take a little bit of getting used to. You know, some people really hate the taste of coriander, and I can understand that because in my early 20s, I wasn't a big fan of it either. But then I met my wife-to-be, Nina, and she was a big Asian foodie. And she introduced me to coriander. She used to sprinkle it fresh over her soups and dishes, typically Thai cooking. I started getting used to it rather quickly, and now I'm a huge fan of it. So what I would say to those people who eat it for the first time and say, oh gee, that's a little bit too strong for me, I would say continue with it, because you will get used to it, and overall you begin to really love it to a point where you really can't do without it in certain dishes. The whole plant is edible as a herb, from the leaves to the flowers to the roots, and also as a spice when the seeds are harvested and used whole or ground into a powder. These green seeds, and there's plenty of them here on this plant, they are really delicious fresh like this, and they're so easy to eat. They've got this lemony flavour that the dried seed doesn't have. You don't often see them for sale green like this or in the shops, but if you're growing it fresh in the garden, this is a great way to eat it. Pickle the seeds or just use the seeds in cooking or in a salad, and it'll bring that dish up beautifully. Now, coriander can be a little finicky to grow, there's no doubt about it, and some people lose heart because they try to grow coriander and it bolts to seed real quickly, they don't have much success, and they wonder why. So, without any further ado, let's get into my 5 top tips, and this will explain how to grow it better, and also maybe why yours isn't growing as good as it possibly should. And there's some interesting reasons for it. Tip number 1, time of year. Coriander is very sensitive to climatic conditions, so growing it at the right time of year is critical if you want good success with growing this type of crop. Despite coriander being a popular plant to grow and use in warm climates such as Thailand and Mexico, for example, it doesn't like hot weather much at all. On its own, coriander likely won't germinate at all during the wrong time of year. If it's too hot or too cold, and if it does germinate, it will probably bolt to seed quickly without even making it to maturity. Here in our warm, humid, subtropical climate, coriander grows for most of the year, except through our hot summers. You know, you can trick coriander into germinating at the wrong time of year. All you need to do is sow it in a controlled environment where the temperature is regulated, such as a greenhouse or even indoors. But if you do that and then want to plant it out, you've got to expect that that plant will probably bolt to seed rather quickly. Which brings me on to tip number 2, succession sowing. Succession sowing, whereby you sow the seed at regular intervals, say every 3 weeks or so, is the only way that you're going to get fresh plants growing and those fresh, lush leaves that you'd expect, like you'd buy from the supermarket. You can sow them either in containers or directly into the garden bed where they are to grow. In fact, I didn't even bother to sow these plants properly. All I did was prop up an old stem of a plant with some dried seeds on it, and I just let it fall naturally into the garden bed. And then they grew by themselves. Because whilst coriander may be sensitive to climatic conditions, it certainly is very well adapted to all types of soils, and it is very forgiving. So you don't have to pamper it too much when you sow it. In fact, like I said, you can just leave them drop and not even bury the seed at all, and you will get strikes and growth at the right time of year. Tip number 3, varieties and adaptation. Besides sowing coriander frequently or at intervals, there are other types of coriander that you might want to consider growing that taste very similar but are slower to bolt, such as Mexican coriander, often called perennial coriander or cilantro. This spiky, large-leafed, low-growing herb is hardier than the standard coriander and popular in its own right in Mexico, not just as a substitute. However, I've grown it several times, and to be honest, I'm not a big fan of the Mexican type coriander. I find the leaves too spiky to handle, and when it goes to seed, the plant changes and the leaves get even thornier, and you go in the garden sometimes and you've got that plant around, I can tell you what, she's sharp as. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of it, but I know plenty of other people are. So if it's for you, check it out. Another type is the Delfino, and you might like to try that because it's also touted as slower to bolt than normal coriander, and it has a similar taste apparently, but softer and smaller leaves, a bit like dill. Ironically, I've had a tough time trying to get this Delfino coriander to grow. I've gone through a whole packet of seed and haven't been able to get one germination. Look, I think I've just had a bad batch, so I'm going to order some more because I do really want to try this type of different dill type leaf coriander out. So yeah, let's check it out. If you have got any experience in growing this type of coriander, let me know in the comment section below because I'd be interested to hear about it. Speaking of seed, adaptation should not be overlooked as a strategy for better growing coriander. I remember when we first started growing coriander here in our garden about 10 years ago, it didn't grow the best, but then we left it go to seed, we harvested the seed and we let some fall to the ground, and then it came up by itself. And year after year, it started getting stronger and stronger. And now we do have plants that are slower to bolt to seed than they used to be. I doubt whether we'll ever get it to adapt all the way through summer here. That's just not going to happen, I don't think. But still, we do have coriander for at least 9 months of the year here. Tip number 4, fertilizer. That's not fertilizer, but don't overfeed coriander. It doesn't need a lot of fertilizer because if you do kill it with love, well, you won't kill it, but it will grow really stunted, dark leaves, and probably bolt to seed fast. It's best to underfeed, if anything, by preparing the bed or container with a little fertilizer, perhaps a little bit of blood and bone combined with just some standard soil, and then I wouldn't feed it again unless the plant is looking sick or yellow. Then perhaps give it a feed of liquid seaweed, etc., to give it a lift. If you're growing coriander in large clumps, like I have here, all clumped up together without thinning it out, then perhaps it will need a bit of a feed depending on how fertile the soil is. If you see it looking a little sickly, well then I would give it a good liquid fertilizer feed and or maybe a handful of blood and bone just scattered around the base, then well watered in, because this could give it a bit of a boost. If you're growing in a clump like this, it is going to compete with each other, and a little bit of extra fertilizer will help. But if you're growing it spaced out or on its own, then I would be fairly light on the fertilizer. Tip number 5, watering. Psst. I don't really need to do that at the moment. I haven't had to water our coriander hardly at all since it started growing, to be quite honest. And especially lately, this last week has been fantastic and annoying. But coriander does like a fair bit of water. Definitely don't let your coriander plants dry out, because that can trigger going to seed as usual. Seems like everything does trigger it to go to seed, but it is, like I said, a finicky type plant. The other thing is, harvest coriander as much as possible. Keep harvesting so it grows bushy and more leaves. But then it will eventually start going to seed, and there's no amount of watering or fertilizing or anything like that that will stop that process. Just live with it, because that's coriander. And that's it. Those were my 5 top tips on how to grow a ton of coriander. Time of year, succession sow, varieties and adaptation, fertilizer and watering. Do all those things right and you can grow a ton of coriander just like I can. Or cilantro. I probably should have said cilantro a lot more, since it's a dominant word in the States. Oh well, I like coriander. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video around, because that helps a lot. And give it a thumbs up. Bye for now. Oh, absolutely beautiful. Give me a few more of these seeds. Oh, see them pop. Ooh, that pop in the mouth. Oh, wow, you've got to try these green coriander seeds. You just have to. They are amazing.